Shantel Bassana, MD and co-founder of XP². Welcome to the Red Zone.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Now, Shantel, XP² is an experiential marketing company. Why do you feel this form of brand communication actually works?
Well, traditionally, Sabrina, traditional marketing or advertising will often offer one-way communication where the message is dictated. It's telling the customer why to buy it. Experiential marketing, on the other hand, just adds a multi-dimension to this. One, people get the opportunity to taste, feel, touch. Secondly, the brand gets a real voice. Customers are able to communicate with the brand, maybe dispel concerns, and we affect the marketing, we affect the purchase decision at the shelf.
How do you prove that this sort of communication works, and what is it that you sell to a client or a brand in terms of promising them a change in brand loyalty or more sales, basically whatever they would be looking for?
Clients choose to use promoters for two reasons. One, the ability to demonstrate. So often with a food brand, for example, you want people to taste it. I don't know if any marketing can affect brand loyalty, but what we can do is we can affect trial. And more importantly, the proof is in the pudding. You know, we want to believe. I think every brand manager wants to believe their brand is best. But the only way to get that kind of loyalty is to actually get the customer to agree with it. So our job really is to be there, to be effective, to be accurate, to provide as much information as we can to that customer in order to make the decision to purchase our product.
Do you not feel that shops and centre courts are becoming oversaturated with promotional tools, that the messaging actually gets lost?
I agree. And I think that is probably one of the greatest benefits of experiential marketing. If you can imagine an aisle in a major grocery store, in-store media has saturated it in itself, and in-store media companies just becoming smarter and with clever messaging. Ultimately, the loudest voice wins. So the opportunity to actually give your brand a physical voice is what I think affects the purchase decision.
Now, from your experience with consumer behavior, what are the key points that brands need to be aware of at shelf? Ultimately, how do shoppers shop?
I think two of the most important things to remember at shelf is, one, brand loyalty. People will often refer to a toothpaste as Colgate or a camera as Kodak. So that in itself is very dangerous. I know I tend to create a shopping list that way. And in the South African climate, probably pricing. One of the most important factors in the decision-making process. So if your product is premium and offers or comes at a higher price, one has to be able to show value.
Now, going back to consumer behavior 101, marketing, branding, etc., it's all about giving the consumer what they need and what they want. Great. How do you feel an experiential campaign will assist in this? And does an experiential campaign also assist in product innovation from the feedback from the consumers on their trial?
It definitely does. It's probably most effective in that scenario with newer brands, because they come into the country, particularly international brands, where they're brought into the country under certain SKUs. Often we'll have customers say, for example, Canderel. We recently launched Canderel Green, and I think they only launched it in one SKU being 80s, and people were asking for the 40-pack. So it does give one experiential marketing, and is field marketing. Yeah. A very large component of it is asking what the customer thinks, and it's part of our process. It's part of our feedback reports. What does our customer want, so that the brand in the future can make decisions that are closer? And you can't address everybody's concerns, but they can definitely make decisions that are closer to what the general public wants or their users or consumers.
Now, you also say that an experiential marketing campaign can be molded to suit any demographic without directly affecting a budget too much. What successes have you experienced with such a targeted activation or campaign?
Sabrina, I think 90% of the campaigns that we run, we do so on that premise. And I think we've been very fortunate that we've had great experiences with major brands in the country. For me, most importantly, I always encourage my clients to start at that point. Knowing the customer is key here, because the information we get from the brands and the research that we do on those brands will ultimately affect the results that we get, and we're measured by the results that we produce. 9 out of 10 times those results are sales-based. Perhaps 10% of our clients are looking for a brand experience, but we're able at the very beginning to set the objectives, set the budgets, and we're a very flexible medium. So if something doesn't work in a particular space, for example, I think toward the end of last year, we had a transport strike, and we had to there were stock issues across the country, but we had a time frame that we needed to work in because of a campaign or promotion that was dated. We were able to reallocate activations in certain areas where there were stock, as opposed to clients losing out on budget because of cancellations. That's in fact, that's the one route I don't like going. We all spend money wisely. Perhaps it's just in our nature as South Africans, and no brand wants to see their results or their budgets having cancellation fees applied. So we try to avoid that as far as possible, but we're also in a fortunate situation. What we do requires very little production, and in traditional media, that's probably the most expensive part.
Now, part of the XP² service offering is that you supply the training for the field workers themselves. How do you ensure that the brand that you're working on or your client gets the best people for the job?
Ultimately, this starts with sourcing. So we follow very stringent recruitment methodology at XP². We are one of the few agencies that I know of that actually interviews candidates before we put them on a database or even invite them to a briefing. At XP², you'd never see somebody for the first time in a briefing. So first and foremost, I have a team that is dedicated to doing that, because those brand ambassadors are representative not only of the brand but of the company, XP². Secondly, our training is extensive. We start with Promotions 101, which to you or me or anyone reading it would seem like the obvious. We take nothing for granted. From the promoter's collection of stock all the way to the space that they'll stand in that store, we talk them through it. What are the expectations? We love inviting brand managers into the training to do the product side of the training, because I don't think anybody sells your brand as well as you do. So that excitement is very important. And we then do sales technique. Now, what we find very important is a promoter needs to understand where they sit in the marketing mix, how they affect the brand performance, the market share. And just sharing information like that with them, I think makes all the difference.
I suppose it's making them feel part of a greater team. And they're not just promotional staff, they actually have a role to play.
Agreed. And I think that changes the dynamic of one who thinks promotions is about standing in a store for 5 or 6 hours and waiting for customers to approach you to ask you what you're doing. When you're excited, you want to tell people what you're doing, and that's what we try to encourage as far as possible. And then the last part of training is sales technique. So we've developed a sales technique guide, and we close with assessments. So we tend to bring in more people than we need, because we staff based on performance in those assessments, in role playing. So 60% of it is role playing and 40% of it is written.
Now, going back to the whole idea of giving consumers what they want and what they need, do you actually think we know what we want?
I think we know what we want right now, and that's all that really matters.
That's all that, okay. All right. Shantel Bassana, thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.